Hello, welcome to today's broadcast. Just a little introductory music, courtesy of my composer, musician, teacher brother. And look, hi, how's everyone doing? Particularly, how are people doing? No, music is not loud enough. Here we go. Particularly people in Texas who may have had long periods of time without water or power, some of whom have got power back but no water. They're having to boil snow to drink. Bob says New Jersey is number one. And what does that mean, Bob? What's that in reference to? Is that number one? Hopefully not in COVID cases, but I'm not sure. Oh, you have the highest death rate from COVID. That's unfortunate. Hey, Cosmic Rose, nice to see you again. How are you doing? So I notice AOC has been running a fundraising drive to collect money for Texans, money to help them pay for stays in hotels that have heating, money for food banks, I hear, is quite critical because of the empty grocery shelves, the difficulty in driving anywhere with the roads that haven't been ploughed or salted or anything. There's been a massive infrastructure collapse, and it looks like Ted Cruz's dog, whose name is Snowflake, was abandoned at home under the care of a security guard in the garage, whilst Ted Cruz took his family to Cancun, Mexico, in the middle of an ongoing pandemic. I mean, people sometimes forget. I had, in fact, not had that at the forefront of my mind as a consideration as well. But Ted Cruz is a senator. It's his job. He's paid quite a significant amount of money to consider people's well-being. And of course, Republicans have become subsumed into such contrarian-style fascism that their job, as they conceive of it, is essentially to undermine American democracy, to advantage certain special wealthy interest groups. And we don't need Macron. Oh, no, Rachmaninoff. All right. Yes, so Ted has no shame. Hello, that's Alan and that's Sheldon. Nice to see you both. Bob is here. McRib is here. Norma Jean is here. Hi, Norma Jean. Oh, there's Norma Jean. Nope. There's Norma Jean. Ted Cancun. Things are still horrible in Richmond, Texas, but your power finally came on. I'm glad to hear it. Cool photos here. Hello, cool photo. Nice to see you. So yes, and Donald Trump Jr. just posted that Democrats are targeting all this ire at their Republican senator in Texas, but what about the Democratic governor? Which means Donald Trump Jr. has possibly so abused cocaine now that he doesn't know anymore that there's a Republican who's the governor of Texas. Texas is solidly Republican. Or it's just a strategy to talk nonsense and just muddy the waters with regards to a whole bunch of people now who are so lost to cult thinking, they are just reactive on a moment-to-moment basis. They want to jeer when prompted to jeer, and facts no longer have any meaning to them, which is interesting and obviously tragic that such a high percentage of Americans remain lost to cult thinking. But at the same time, the more blatantly cultish and removed from facts they become, you hope that has a commensurate relationship with the number of people who peel off the Republican Party. I don't want to say any of that without statistics to back me up, because motivated reasoning or wishful thinking is one of the key problems that we contend with in this era, especially during a pandemic. During a pandemic, it's critical to have public health messaging that's consistent, that is repeated from as many sources as possible at all levels of society, to spread as broad a net as possible, to bring people on board with an understanding of what needs to be done, to build up public understanding of the need to comply and public motivation to comply. Yeah. The Cuomo debacle was a debacle, but I'm still not forgetting the origin story of the Andrew Cuomo situation, the Governor Cuomo situation, which is that the man in charge of the United States at that time was the only person getting the billion-dollar work product of America's intelligence agencies. The billion-dollar work product. That is to say, people with huge budgets and thousands of staff members working in intelligence who were able to go to Donald Trump as president at the time and say, there is a pandemic in China. It appears to be airborne. The Chinese government may be concealing the extent of it. The indications are that it's going to be a problem for the United States. And Donald Trump had that knowledge. We're lucky enough to know that he disclosed some of that knowledge to a journalist who he had repeated interviews with, Bob Woodward, repeated recorded interviews of Donald Trump on February the 7th, 2020, saying it's airborne, it's a problem. So he knew that on February the 7th. Did the governors of the hard-hit American states have access to any of this information? No. Trump had it as president. All of that work product goes to Trump in the assumption that as leader of the United States, he will disclose critical information to other leaders as well as to the general public. He didn't tell Cuomo that it was an airborne virus. He didn't tell Cuomo or anybody who needed to know that it was a highly contagious disease that affected not only the elderly, but also young people, and that it was spread by asymptomatic young people and resulted in high deaths that were concentrated amongst the elderly but were not restricted to the elderly. So that's not on Cuomo. Cuomo was dumped with this unnecessarily huge and intractable public health problem, and he was walking in the dark. So I don't want to excuse what he did, which is lie about the numbers of people who died in nursing homes, but he was also trying to act to stop New York's hospital systems from being overwhelmed and collapsing, to stop New York's healthcare professionals from burning out and being unable to treat people in New York City for any problem. Because that is a problem. You get secondary deaths from a pandemic when hospital systems reach overwhelm. And that overwhelm is a byproduct of Donald Trump's decisions. So that's my answer to people on the right who like to laser-like focus on their perceived enemies because they won't rationally engage with facts anymore. They act like life is a team sport and they've picked their team and they're only going to barrack for their team and they're never, ever going to stand back and look at the big picture anymore. So I try hard not to get lost into that team sport language of deriding other people as cockroaches or immoral, because when you overgeneralize, you crowd out space for some people to at least act with a tiny bit of morality. So, for example, the Republican officials in Georgia who often act in an immoral way to disenfranchise Black Americans, to make it more difficult for them to vote, to obstruct their access to voting, etc. I don't endorse or celebrate those people, but they acted with a degree of morality and conscience and also enough faith in the rule of law to act as if they didn't want to personally be involved in breaking the law in order to assist Donald Trump in overthrowing American democracy and installing himself as president for a second term. So when I say that, I'm speaking about Georgian Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a Republican who acted with a degree of conscience. That highlights my central message, which is whilst we need to keep sharing information and keep telling each other stories, which is how you engage and build consensus and build understanding, that is also key not to succumb all the time to that easy temptation to just be snide and cynical and deride others and generalize to put everybody in the same camp. It's a fine line. You're treading the balance between honestly describing the activities of most Republicans as being overly selfish, focused on tax avoidance, focused on deregulation at the expense of public health and safety, etc. Did Alex Jones end up eating his neighbors? I didn't realize that was in contention. Does Alex Jones live in Texas and was he hungry? Ted Cruz is employed by Goldman Sachs. She's a director of Goldman Sachs, I believe, and they own many of the electricity companies that operate in Texas in a very under-regulated fashion, because Texas politicians have purposefully kept the Texas electricity grid independent from the national electricity grid. And that prized independence and individualism has meant Texas electricity didn't have backup to the same degree that another state would have backup from neighboring states' energy supplies when there was an infrastructure failure. And there's infrastructure failures in Texas because some of the parts are as old as from the 1930s. Some of them are made out of porcelain, and they have failed in a very broad and also predictable way, given that there were storms in 2011 and Texas officials were warned that there would be a need to invest money in weatherizing various instrument components of the electricity system. Exactly. Cynicism is a very rational response, but there are limitations to that cynicism, because cynicism is not motivating. You just sit back and go, yeah, everything sucks, just as I thought. So I was right, and you get that intellectual reinforcement of, or that dopamine hit of going, I was right. Humans like being right about things, but you don't get the energy you need to change things. So while I sympathize with cynicism, and you need some cynicism in order to not go mad, because if you just tried to be optimistic, the gap between your understanding and your reality of obstructive, corrupt Republican politicians would drive you mad. So you have to bridge that gap with some cynicism, but you need to leave space for the kind of hope that prompts people to mobilize, like Stacey Abrams in Georgia. Cynicism would have just said, yep, Georgia's a red state and it's a lost cause and it never will be anything other than a red state. But hope, motivation, dreams plus dedication equals something. I'm just thinking of a quote that I've seen engraved on a stone bench, put in the garden of the Gutenbergs. Fred Gutenberg's posted a picture of it. You may know him. His daughter Jamie was massacred in the Valentine's Day massacre at Parkland. All right, let's see if I can find the saying. Dreams plus dedication equals. Okay, Jamie's favorite saying was, dreams and dedication are a powerful combination. All right, good. And I will show you the park bench that they have in their garden. Oh, that's so sweet. You looked for my Patreon. Yes, I will definitely give you the name, Indoor Smokers. I'm so excited that you did that. Just excited because I respect you, and to have your endorsement means a lot to me. Okay, so my Patreon. So you have to go to the Patreon website and /Gav chat. There you go. Oh, look, everybody's putting that up there. That's Alan. Thank you so much. Done. Remember when you suggested I listen for the word reconciliation? Now do I understand why? I hope so. Yes, from what I understand now, the budget reconciliation process is the limited measure that Democrats have with their slim majority in the Senate to sidestep the filibuster. Oh, wow, I just got a notification from Patreon already. That's so cool. Bless you. My gosh, you are quick off the bat. Whoever did that. You did. I got a notification on my phone straight away. Bless your heart. Bless your heart. I swear there is nothing so rewarding happening in my life at the moment, as much as my children, but also my endorsement and engagement with Americans that I consider my friends. I know you support me on Patreon, but I would buy any of you a drink in a bar should we happen to see each other in the United States. I noticed that Dr. Fauci has told journalists that he is predicting Christmas, that there will be a return to normality by Christmas. There's declensions of normality that people would be comfortable with. I think many families and parents would really appreciate being able to send their children to school. Those people who've surveyed American children and their families have found that 85% of surveyed children are concerned that they haven't seen their friends for a long time. Their parents were concerned about other things as well, but yes, and they were concerned that they didn't know how long the pandemic would continue for. I mean, people have been variable in their hopes. It often seems as if surveys are sometimes conducted but then used to manipulate Americans to say, this is how the public feels, as if to say this is how it's always going to be. But people don't dictate things to their leaders. It's not a unidirectional relationship. The leadership of America very much shaped Americans' expectations during the pandemic, even though that occurred in disparate, partisan directed ways. Donald Trump told the people who listened to him, he told the people who take him seriously that the pandemic was overstated, overhyped, nothing to be afraid of. The key thing was to ignore it in order to support the economy, whereas really Trump hurt the economy. He prolonged the pandemic unnecessarily by focusing on a forced return to normalcy rather than achieving normalcy via helping support public health, helping limit the spread of a viral disease, working with reality. Donald Trump tried to sidestep reality for the convenience of pretending that the pandemic wasn't real, and the convenience of capitalizing on the gullibility of wish fulfillment thinking prevalent amongst many Americans. Your father's in an assisted living facility and you haven't seen him in over a year. That would be really hard. That would be really hard. My father's in a different country, but he's not in an assisted living facility. He's living his best life. He's got a girlfriend. He's essentially his de facto wife. They've been together for a couple of years now, and oh my gosh, probably more. They've probably been together for really long, and I'm just discounting that. They've probably been together for like close to 5 years now. Wow, I shouldn't call her his girlfriend at all. My father has a partner, and they're very serious, and they live together. And he effectively has 3 extra grandchildren now, and they at least live in the same country as him. So I know he's happy and busy, and my father likes to help people, so that's good. You're hoping this summer you can visit your father, but we'll see. And Kevin hasn't seen his grandmother in over a year, but maybe in 2 months from now, we'll see. So how does that make you feel that in the middle of a pandemic, when Mexico is at level 4, apparently the highest level for concern about contagiousness of COVID in Mexico at present? How does everybody feel that Ted Cruz took his 2 daughters and his wife flew to Cancun in Mexico whilst the infrastructure in his state was collapsing and children were freezing to death in cars with their parents, and thousands of people were, probably millions really, were experiencing significant property damage with pipes bursting and flooding their house whilst they had no power and no running water. Absolutely, Ted Cruz's flight records have been leaked as well, indicating that he was going to return on Saturday. So he returned precipitately on Thursday because of the media storm originating on Twitter. High five for being part of Twitter. Yes. Bob's going to leave because it's so late. You're going to mention Rudy will be indicted. I've heard that rumor. It's exciting. Is it being confirmed? Yes. Trump's COVID denialism was part of his effort to steal the election, though. So Trump anticipated losing to Biden, hence the intimidation and blackmail of the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky. at the time in order to try and sabotage Biden running as a candidate. Trump's not as stupid as people claim him to be. He's, yes, undereducated, a terrible businessman who repeatedly bankrupts multiple casinos and other businesses. So his confidence in his own business acumen is unwarranted, and perhaps he knows that, but he still would like to have some more of your money in the bank's money to gamble with. Thank you very much. But he knew that he might lose if Biden was opposing him. He tried to squash that possibility of running against Biden by sabotaging his candidacy before he became the Democratic nominee, by virtue of asking Vladimir Zelensky to go on a CNN show with Fareed Zakaria and make an announcement that he was organically going to open an investigation into Joe Biden's son. Now, that type of propaganda where you force people to do something, but or you're involved in pressuring another country to do something, but you conceal that origin. So you say, just go on the television show, but don't say why you're doing this. Don't tell anybody we told you to do it or we asked you. There should have been more emphasis on what was planned, because there was a slot booked in for Vladimir Zelensky to appear on CNN. But it's just that the CIA whistleblower who leaked his complaint about the contents of Trump's phone call with Vladimir Zelensky. I mean, that phone call that Trump kept saying, read the transcript, that's just the tip of the iceberg in relation to all of the diplomatic and outside of diplomatic pressure that Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and potentially William Barr as well, were all putting on the team around the Ukrainian president. Yes. So I hope Rudy Giuliani gets indicted, because his involvement in betraying American democracy is very high. He's a critical linchpin. Even now, he's still spreading propaganda, disinformation as fast as his little fingers can type on Twitter. Yes, Fareed Zakaria is probably a good show. I haven't watched it, but that was the place where Trump was pressuring Vladimir Zelensky to appear on. It was organized. He was booked in to appear on Fareed's show and announce an investigation and just pretend that it was something that organically occurred to the Ukrainian president, the Ukrainian system of government, that they just had to launch an investigation into Joe Biden's son, because with the implication that there was just so much evidence. Ignoring the fact that Hunter Biden had already been cleared of wrongdoing, there'd already been investigations. That was just all to advance a false narrative that Joe Biden was corrupt. Actually, Joe Biden had pressured the Ukrainian government to fire a corrupt prosecutor who was involved in holding up foreign investment in Ukraine, because people were concerned that that corrupt prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, was stalling investigations into corrupt companies that were taking bribes, that had leftover corrupt practices from when the Ukrainian government was essentially controlled by Vladimir Putin and other corrupt friends of Putin. Does that make sense to people? I can bring up an article about it if you like. Fareed Zakaria. President Zelensky. Okay, good. I found it. That was easy. There's a CNN article about it. Not given a great deal of publicity at the time. It would have made an entertaining story in the impeachment to describe what Trump wanted to happen. The fact that everything was organized to sell this false narrative. Okay. These ads are getting in the way. Can you see that writing? I can make it bigger. It says CNN host was set. Oh, there's an ad. Yeah, 2, 3, 4. Frustrating. Okay, the really just critical thing I want to show you is that headline. Can you see? CNN host was set to interview Ukrainian president until scandal took place. Because the poor old Zelensky was being held hostage. How many $1 million was it? $300 million or $400 million worth of military aid to go to his people, to go to the military to defend them from being killed by Russian forces, advancing Russian army forces. So just to read to you a little bit, CNN host Fareed Zakaria said on Thursday that he had been set to interview Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky before news about the Ukrainians' call with Donald Trump broke. The New York Times reported on Thursday that Zelensky had planned to announce an investigation into Trump's political rivals during a September interview on CNN. Zakaria told CNN's Brooke Baldwin on Thursday that the interview had been months in the making, but it fell apart when the Ukrainian scandal began to unfold, although CNN did not cancel it. We had been negotiating with President Zelensky and his office for a while, for months, to try and get an interview with him anyway, ever since he was elected president. So Fareed had that credibility of, yep, we're a global news show. We try to interview people from around the world. So that wouldn't have looked like Trump was forcing that on anyone. That's organic. Fareed Zakaria genuinely wanted to interview the new president of Ukraine, who was a former television actor and comedian who had become the president of Ukraine on a campaign of ending corruption. Once news of the whistleblower's complaint surfaced, it became clear to us that the interview was off. The Times reported that the decision to unfreeze the aid to Ukraine erased the need for Zelensky's televised appearance. Well, what does that mean? That sounds like the Times is probably trying to muddy the waters a bit and acting like, oh, well, Trump just decided to unfreeze the aid. So, he wasn't pressuring anybody anymore. That's a complicated thing to tease out. But the actual chronology of it sounds from Fareed's mouth as if it became clear to us that the interview was off when news of the whistleblower's complaint surfaced. So once it became evident that the president of Ukraine had agreed to the interview so that he could go and say what Trump asked him to say in return for the unfreezing of the aid. But once it was outed, then the blackmail that Trump was trying to organize was off. The blackmail became impotent because the CIA whistleblower disclosed to the public what had happened. Almost all of Zelensky's aides supported the planned announcement on the show, one of the officials who debated the issue told The Times. They agreed that American military aid and diplomatic support during upcoming peace talks were worth the risk of seeming to support Trump in the American political process. Oh my God, seeming to support Trump in the American political process? What an underplaying of that corrupt deal. Trump corrupted the Ukrainian government by forcing them to agree to not just be seen to help Trump, to corruptly announce an investigation that was not merited by the facts, to just announce the investigation, not because of a need to do so, but at the secret instigation of the American president, hoping to sabotage his opponent's run for office against him. Yes, obviously I get that, the withholding of military aid, yes, quid pro quo, which initiated the impeachment charges. And Zelensky was suffering. He was suffering. There was this promised aid. They knew it was promised. The branch of American government that has the power of the purse is the legislative branch, Congress. And Congress had apportioned $400 million worth of military aid to Ukraine, which is an ally of the United States. And their alliance had been strengthened by the election of Volodymyr Zelensky because he was less of a Putin ally and he was fresh blood who would run on an anti-corruption platform. But Trump corrupted him. Trump didn't just make him risk the appearance of helping him, it would have helped him. It would have been a massive Hillary's emails death blow to Joe Biden to have what would seem to be the president of Ukraine independently, organically, self-determinationally initiating an investigation. Now, the terms of the quid pro quo deal with Trump wasn't that they had to conduct the investigation, just that they had to announce it, just that they had to feed the gaping maw of the American media beast on a show with credibility, Fareed Zakaria, who was going to be used and sullied in that way to be the vehicle for undermining the credibility of Joe Biden as a U.S. public servant, to besmirch him, to frame him for corrupt activity. So this is why the impeachment was so necessary. Not that it succeeded, the first impeachment, but that it helped clear Joe Biden. It helped by uncovering the details of that plot. It cleared Joe Biden in the American media so that they couldn't mount a Hillary's email style perpetual undercutting of the Democratic candidate. Hi, Dana. Some lollies.
Yeah. I thought there's strips of those candy strips.
Candy strips? Did you find, the ones that were left over from your sister's cake? Did you find them?
Mm-hmm.
As long as you give one to your sister and one to you, okay?
I also have some little ones.
Sweetie, they're not the best if you're trying to get over sniffles. Just have one each, okay, Baba? Have you eaten all your carrot? Oh, Mr. X. It is such a pleasure that Mr. X, the disgraced former office occupier, is no longer credible in the media or a headline, etc. Fox still gives him a platform, and he still produces devastating anti-migrant propaganda on that channel. So you can really see how much the right-wing media bubble controls the thinking of a substantial proportion of America's population, because Donald Trump's popularity rating fell 16 points in the days following the insurrection. So that was the American public, including some Republicans, some Trump supporters, responding to real events before the right-wing media bubble had a chance to spin it. So that's organic. That's not a quid pro quo. That's just people saying, oh, look, we've seen the news all day. There's live breaking footage of Trump supporters waving Trump flags in Trump beanies, breaking into the Capitol, smearing their feces on the walls inside, searching out the vice president to kill him, erecting a gallows to kill him, looking for Nancy Pelosi to kill her, and to hold lawmakers hostage in order to halt the counting of the Electoral College votes, disrupt that process, and then create room for Donald Trump to collude with one of the corrupt officials in the Department of Justice, Jeffrey Clark, we now know, who was prepared to overrule Georgian election officials and pronounce Donald Trump the victor in that state and disqualify the results of enough Democratic voters to say, oh, look, he won. We've found him 11,780 votes. Trump won Georgia. Now, Michigan's turn. Your turn, Michigan, or maybe our acting attorney general needs to come in and overrule your election officials as well. And you can see there's a lot of push still from Trump-loyal Republicans to do anything they can to overturn elections for him, to disenfranchise Black voters for him, to resurrect, to reform American government around the idea of a sort of quasi-monarchy arrangement whereby Trump is installed in perpetuity and you can't get him out via elections. You can have a sham managed democracy with maybe some people voting, but then just it's okay to make sure that the votes of people who don't vote for Trump don't count and get thrown out. They're questionable. They're not legal because they come from counties that aren't legal and shouldn't be certified because there's just there's a question mark over them, and we're going to fabricate anything. We're going to look at video footage of people bringing extra ballots to be counted in suitcases and say, well, that's clearly illegitimate. Votes just have to be carried in suspended animation to be counted in counting centres. They can't come in suitcases. They can't come in large recycling bins. They have to be wafted in on a Trump flag. Like, you know, there's once you start allowing them to discount votes that aren't for their semi-deified evangelical Christian advocate, then you're letting them have a managed democracy, a sham managed democracy, erected as a carapace around Trump monarchy. So, yes, you have the monarchy. Sorry, not the monarchy. You have the majority, but Democrats have had the majority for a while. It's just periodically the urban-rural divide grows large enough for the electoral college system to overturn the results of the popular vote. And the electoral college system isn't an equal system, an equal alternative to the popular vote. It supersedes the popular vote. It's a weighting towards American small states, which privileges white voters in those smaller, more rural, more agrarian states, which have longer histories of white land ownership and white ownership of slaves, and so have more persistent remnants of hierarchical slave owning type thinking, whereby those people would be happy to re-enslave Black Americans if there was not a legal or social cost to doing so. And there's already very little legal or social cost to enslaving people via that exception to the 13th Amendment, whereby you can imprison people and force them to labor for a pittance. So that type of modern day slavery of arresting predominantly Black Americans for minor drug crimes and then generating heaps of cheap labor from their enforced labor in a prison setting, particularly in private prison settings in which private prison owners make large donations to Republican candidates such as Trump and then derive huge volumes of income from taxpayers who have to pay to continue to detain or mass incarcerate people, whilst relying on right-wing media engines to keep eroding public sympathy for those people who've been convicted of a crime of marijuana usage or possession, or any other minor crimes that police officers and the judicial system continue to disproportionately investigate and charge people of colour. The Sheldon makes the point that the Department of Justice has a long way to go in rectifying their allegiance to the big lie bozo. Ooh, the big lie bozo. I like that. Biden was left a mess to fix in that agency. Yes. And in what other agencies can we think of? Has Betsy DeVos gone yet? Probably. Yes, because somebody new was appointed. But yeah, there's a lot of house clearing to do. And Joe Biden was President Biden was savaged by right-wing media for having made a verbal slip and said there was no vaccine when he got into office, meaning there was no vaccine plan. He just elided one word, but he'd made other references to the vaccine existing prior to his elevation to the office, to the Oval Office. So Biden knows and acknowledges that the vaccines were already invented. I mean, the which vaccine? The Pfizer vaccine, that was that didn't rely on Trump administration money either. That was not a product of Operation Warp Speed funding. They independently did that because they wanted the credibility from not being associated with that particular administration. Cosmic Rose thinks as soon as Garland gets approved, things will clear up pretty quickly. We hope so. Bernadette's here. Hello, Bernadette. Nice to see you. Or was the Moderna vaccine? Okay. I'm getting confused with my vaccines now. So we've got the Johnson & Johnson one with a slightly lower efficacy, but only one dose that can be just refrigerated at normal temperatures and doesn't have to be refrigerated at ultra cold temperatures, which makes transport and distribution easier, as well as compliance. When you don't have to get people to come back for a second dosage, it's easier to get broad adoption of it. So I quite like the J&J vaccine. A late coming entrant to the vaccine race, but still good. So the main ones are the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine. Is that correct? Yes, so Republican state legislatures have apparently introduced, I think, 168 different pieces of legislation aiming at making voting more difficult. They are working to eliminate pre-voting or early voting in various Republican state legislatures. And there's a lot of Republican state legislatures across America, because even with lots of votes for Joe Biden, Lincoln Project style Republicans who understood that Trump was a menace still had this faith in Republican politicians in general, a very misplaced faith. And I think it's going to be a galvanizing historical moment that Ted Cruz so blatantly left to go on holiday during this historic infrastructure collapse in Texas, which is a very big state with a very big population. So the scale of the disaster of the thousands upon thousands of buildings sustaining significant damage with roof collapses, and the elderly freezing, and a Democrat private citizen such as Beto O'Rourke stepping up, organizing phone drives of people calling in to elderly citizens to check if they're connected to available resources, such as warming centers, and whatever type of Meals on Wheels situations they're able to get off the ground. Democrats, AOC is running a fundraising drive to help Texas, whereas Ted Cruz had to be shamed to return home from a family holiday in Cancun when Mexico is under a CDC travel warning to say don't go there. And indeed, there's a diplomatic arrangement between Mexico and the United States that precludes tourism, that says no tourism should occur at present because of the pandemic. Essential travel could still occur. Did I see your comment about Dr. Eric Topol? I'll go and have a look. And you asked me, there's a big Australian story about Facebook. They're not putting government health news or any type of news in Facebook because the Australian government said, we're going to charge you money. You have to pay money to news organizations that you host on Facebook. And Facebook was like, well, if we let the Australian government introduce this type of regulation, that will open the floodgates to governments all over the world doing it, which will eat into our profit margin. So we are instead going to punish the Australian government by shutting down Australian government pages. So the Bureau of Meteorology page, other places that people have become reliant on for news and for government info. So there are websites that people can go to, but they don't know them anymore. They became dependent on Facebook as a connecting point for finding out all their info. And that information is just not available now on Facebook because of this war being waged between Facebook and the Australian government, who are kind of acting on behalf of Rupert Murdoch in a way, because Rupert Murdoch prefers people to not rely on Facebook for news, but to watch and read his media platforms. Rupert Murdoch, who you may know as the owner of Fox News, owns 70% of print media in Australia. So he doesn't like print media fading out because people rely on Facebook. Australians have such terrible resources available to them for news. It's like the frying pan or the fire. Either you get things on Facebook, in which case you're also subject to your crazy uncle sharing InfoWars videos on Facebook, together with your Bureau of Meteorology input, or Murdoch newspapers, which if they're not owned by Rupert Murdoch, they're owned by one of his friends. And it's just very, very difficult to get quality analysis of what's happening in Australia. So your Australian friends, I would imagine, are very upset. I'm not upset because I've quit Facebook a while ago and I don't use it. But also I don't live in Australia, so I don't need it to look up the Bureau of Meteorology because fires in Australia don't affect me right now. Storms in Australia don't affect me right now. But yes, I'm happy for everybody to be running a campaign to quit Facebook in Australia. They're running a campaign, delete Facebook. I've used that hashtag a lot during my time on social media because I encourage people to reduce their reliance on Facebook. It's a mechanism for facilitating the spread of disinformation. Facebook has allowed algorithms to promote fake news. Literal, I hate using a Trump phrase, but the highest sites with the most hits on Facebook are Ben Shapiro's page and Tucker Carlson and just bad people spreading anti-migrant, vituperative, spiteful bullshit. bull dust. All right, so a quote about Topol. Nope, don't see a quote about Topol. I know Dr. Eric Topol, he's good. Fox reporters are listening very closely for anything they can twist to fit the conservative message. Yes. So not everybody understands of the vast, mutually supportive conspiracy between wealthy people all around the world. Vladimir Putin's very wealthy. Rupert Murdoch's very wealthy. They want to preserve their fossil fuel profits. Ooh, the Koch brothers, the surviving Koch brother. They've got a very powerful and entrenched information infrastructure that keeps the minds of a lot of Americans locked up and towing the line. Look at that 16-point fall in approval rating for Trump I mentioned before. I didn't get to the follow-up point, which is it's bounced back again. And that's because the immediate response to the Trump incited insurrection was revulsion. 16% of Republicans going, ew. And that's, not 16% of Republicans, 16% of Americans. No. Let's find the data on that. 16% of Republicans approval rating for Trump post-riot. Okay, so Forbes was reporting on the 10th of February. Okay. This is going to be a fun story to read anyway, but the generally bad thing is that Trump's popularity bounced back with conservative media spin. So 10th of February, published, GOP's popularity plummets in wake of Capitol riot. Well, this is why what Cruz has done is so significant as well, because even if Trump's had some resurgence of popularity after Fox News has said wasn't really Trump's fault, he's just being persecuted again by Nancy Pelosi and Antifa. Remember Antifa and how much you hate them, and they're very primed and conditioned to be whipped up in a fervor of animosity against the far left, which, I don't love the far left, but they're not the central players in American politics. So they're a slightly real boogeyman, they're a slightly real communist menace, but a very thin, weak communist menace that Rush Hannity and everybody else on the right has made into an enormous boogeyman for decades in order to get Americans to be on board with the undermining of their infrastructure, the undermining of their roads and bridges and education systems, all in the name of resisting communism from the unwashed young idealists who keep saying that capitalism is Satan. which is not a practical ideology to form your identity around in the midst of a capitalist society where most people embrace capitalism, and there are disadvantages, but they are the products of under-regulated capitalism and corrupted capitalism. So I would like to mobilize people to resist the ongoing corruption of government. And I'm on the winning side in that, yes, enough Americans with common sense managed to recognize the degree of the threat offered by Trump to decent society, and they ousted him from government. They didn't just give him a chance to harm more Americans and to oversee the death of more Americans via COVID. As Indoor Smoker pointed out before, it hurt his credibility that he came out and announced that COVID was something to be waged war against, that it was an invisible enemy at one point when he saw that there might be an advantage to appearing as a wartime president. But then he decided it would be better to have a plot to steal the election by relying on the gullibility of his supporters to deceive them about the nature of the pandemic and to make them feel confident and comfortable in voting in person on the day of the November 3rd election, knowing that Biden supporters would be listening to health officials instead and feeling concerned about the pandemic and would be less likely to vote in person on November the 3rd. And he did all of that to construct a narrative saying, just count the votes on the day. Just count in-person votes first, count the mail-in votes next, and then recognize that mail-in is inherently fraudulent and a method of stealing from me what is rightfully mine, the throne of the United States. Yes, it is very possible to be both capitalist and have progressive ambitions for America, namely to address the plight of people who suffer from a very impoverished minimum wage, to want people to have a better access to healthcare, to want America's healthcare system to be reformed so that it's not withheld from large swathes of the American public, so that everybody has preventative healthcare, making America a stronger, more cohesive society, and stopping the wastefulness of the bureaucracy involved in America's essentially private insurance-centric healthcare system, which involves Americans paying extraordinarily large sums of money for healthcare whilst their projected longevity rates fall, unlike everywhere else in the industrialized world, which has increasing longevity expectations because modern science is associated with longer life, just not in America, where millions of people struggle to get access to preventative healthcare and healthcare treatment of any kind. Yes. Well, yes. Republican votes usually rely quite heavily on Republicans taking advantage of mail-in voting and voting early, but they were turned off from taking advantage of that. So that helped. Well, I'm not going to say suppressed it that much because a lot of Republicans still managed to vote. I mean, 74.2 million? But they were just overwhelmed by the rest of America, which had shaken off its complacency of 2016 and complacency aggravated by sexism against a female candidate, or complacency affected by the unfortunate decision to have an all-white running ticket instead of galvanizing Black votes for the Democratic Party by having somebody of color on the ticket to represent the interests of people who are historically and systematically discriminated against by multiple American institutions, financial institutions, the real estate sector, the corporate world in terms of employment, et cetera, et cetera. Cosmic Rose left Zuckbook 5 years ago. Zuckbook, interesting. So you're recommending an interview with Dr. Topol on Amanpour and Co. last week, which is a good interview. I shall write that down so I can have a look. Dr. Topol on Christine Amanpour. Okay. Hi, Craig. Nice to see you. Did I see the new shows they're putting together? Who's putting together new shows? All right. All right, folks, I feel like I should be letting people go to sleep. Does anybody... Oh, Norma Jean didn't realize I moved. Yes. I started broadcasting when I was in Sydney, Australia. I moved as a trailing spouse to follow my husband, who is very indulgent and supportive of his wife, who centers her life around reading about American circumstances and then talking about American circumstances. He appreciates that this fuels my sense of doing good in the world and my ambitions to take an abrupt left in my career trajectory, potentially, depending on what I can find employment-wise when we move to the US. It's been nice for me to be able to not be gainfully employed while taking care of my family after we move to a new country, to be here by myself without friends or family. I've had American friends and family, and I've been able to make some friends in this new country. We live in an Asian country, closer to the tropics now, which is why I'm never cold and never wearing a beanie or any warm clothes. That's why. So I am quiet about that. You should change your racist name, because you say complimentary things, but I'm going to ask my moderators to mute you or block you if they see you whilst you still have that name. It's racist. And it's Nazi. Why do you have a Nazi name? Have you ever tried to explain to me your justification for having a racist Nazi name? I am moving to Boston. It's been postponed multiple times because of the out-of-control pandemic situation, but Joe Biden and competent leadership in the United States is gradually bringing that pandemic under control. Since January the 5th, I think, that's the peak infection time in the world, and infections have been falling across the world since then, which I think is an indicator of the negative impact that Trump propaganda had on the whole world, because he was a very notable public figure and he very adamantly pushed disinformation on the world, on his own population, but on the world, in order to maximize his chances of retaining power, in order to maximize his sorting technique of having his voters vote in person and Biden voters vote more cautiously, more prudently, more pandemic warily by mail, and then claim victory that mail-in votes were fraudulent and only in-person votes on November the 3rd should count. That was clearly his strategy for stealing the election from Joe Biden, and it didn't work. There was too much attention paid to mail-in voting, too much pushback against Louis DeJoy's efforts to sabotage the ability of mail-in votes to reach counting centers in a timely fashion. He decommissioned over 600 mail-in voting machines in critical states, in swing states across the United States. Trump had all of the Russian assistance to keep boosting QAnon propaganda that said Joe Biden and Hollywood Democrat supporters are all part of a civilization destroying, baby eating movement. People who voted for Trump thought that when Biden won, they had to pull their kids out of school so that they weren't immediately captured by pedophiles. People were extraordinarily anxious and upset. The people that were most lost to the Q cult, to the pro-Trump Q cult. Do I have a moderator yet on YouTube? Pick a few. Yes, I will pick you and Sheldon and Alan. Thank you for reminding me about HAPS. I should really better put that in my diary to do a HAPS broadcast tomorrow, because I've got to start building my audience there. And I'll put up my HAPS name so that everybody please follow me on HAPS. So that when they do shut down Periscope, if you like my broadcast, that you still have an opportunity to follow me. There you go. I'm just DavCat on HAPS. And Twitch and YouTube, DavCat43. Yes, it's Biden can't directly fire DeJoy, but he can replace the US Board of Governors. Bernie Sanders and some other Democrats were part of obstructing Obama's picks, because Obama tried to have some moderate bipartisan choices to put on the Board of Governors for the United States Postal Service, and he was blocked in putting on those choices, which meant Obama didn't get to choose anybody. And then the minute Trump was in office, he got to stack them with, incredibly hyper-partisan pro-Trumpy people. And pro-Trump is a proxy for saying immoral and unethical. So the immoral and unethical people on the Board of Governors allowed DeJoy to essentially sack the United States Postal Service and to continue to sack it, to raise prices, to make it more inefficient, to cause the deaths of Americans by delaying their essential medications and delaying their checks. Yes, and on HAPS, I can simulcast to Periscope and Twitch and others, which is why I should do it now, but I'm still using the service I subscribe to called StreamYard, which allows me to share my screen like this. But I have to just give up that. I'm enamored of it. I have to let it go. I have to let go the ability to look like a proper news pundit type person saying, yes, regard this footage. So obviously this is an image of the Capitol building. This is a Forbes story still depicting the Capitol after Trump's supporters breached it and security forces responded with tear gas to try and recover the Capitol for the American people instead of the armed insurrectionists. So a new Gallup poll conducted from January the 21st to February the 2nd with a sample of 906 adults found that just 37% of Americans have a positive view of the Republican Party, a decrease from 43% in November. So that's a 6% drop. Notably, the 6-point drop was driven most by those who identify as Republicans, whose favorability rating of the Republican Party dropped 12 points from 90% to 78%. The Democratic Party, on the other hand, is viewed positively by 48% of Americans, up 3 points since November. And the last time the GOP's favorability rating dropped below 40% was in January 2019, when a dispute for funding over Trump's border wall caused a partial government shutdown. Not since October 2013, when Republicans attempted to defund elements of the Affordable Care Act, leading to a fight with Democrats and a partial government shutdown, has the Democratic Party enjoyed a double-digit margin in favorability. Thousands of registered Republicans have renounced their party registration. I mean, this is key. Eroding Republican support is key, even as the rest of the Republican Party that still support Trump, they're continuing to radicalize. They're on a pathway of radicalization, which is a problem because that's a pathway to domestic terrorism, to having a critical subset of crazy people within that subset of Republican Trump loyalists who will seek to assassinate the current administration. That's why there's fencing around the Capitol still. That's why there's thousands of National Guard members still on patrol in and around the Capitol in order to protect people from the domestic terrorist efforts of people loyal to Trump's alternative reality, where he has been the victim, always the victim, but this time the victim of a big theft of a whole ass election. All right. But most GOP supporters still support Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz after the Capitol riots. So we really hope that they were just indulging Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, and that this is kind of like a final straw for some of them. I don't know. I don't know how powerful the right-wing media bubble will be at any point in time. But yes, a steady drip of defectors. And if Trump starts his MAGA party or his third party, then yes, my green screen. Yes, I also miss my green screen. There's no green screen option that I have. Cool Photo is already following me on Haps. Excellent. Norma Jean is letting me know that there's another website called Prism. Ooh, if Prism lets me have my green screen back, then that would be nice. I really do love my green screen. All right, folks. Thank you so much for your engagement, your attention, and your ongoing support. Mwah, love you all. And take care. Alan, I acknowledge that you're calling them termites in an evocative sense, but I'm wondering how loyal I am to my own stated position that I think it's preferable to stick to describing them in human terms. There's lots of human-related words, and just I have some reasoning for that. This is not reasoning set in stone, but my reasoning for not referring to Republicans as any type of vermin or termites or pests is because that kind of escalation in that language use is usually precursors to genocide. In Rwanda, they called people on the other side cockroaches. We're familiar, obviously, us Jewish people, with other examples. So I acknowledge and understand the temptation to do it, but I've got conflicting motivations here. Personal integrity, I want to maintain that position of helping make the argument to discourage usage of dehumanizing language. But at the same time, I never want to discourage my followers from expressing their hurt feelings about the betrayal of Republicans in power. Thanks, Norma Jean. Thanks, Indoor Smokers. Thanks so much for becoming a Patreon. Now I have 22 Patreons of people who feel as if I'm a valuable source of entertainment and information. Everybody who has analyzed Rush Limbaugh today has said he was entertaining. He brought people along with him. He used unpredictable long pauses to keep people on the edge of their seats and to stay engaged. When would he finish his sentence and what would he say? So he had novelty, unpredictability, vitriolic hostility towards women, feminists, people on the left, college students, contraception users, black people. Oh, I'm going to get off now, darling. You've been very patient, actually, haven't you? You want to play? Let's play. You going to wave goodbye?
Bye.
Good girl. All right. Yes, exactly. Russia, Republicans, these are all human terms, which is good, I think. I think name calling is fair. I just prefer to keep them within the human realm because dehumanizing language, if you allow it for yourself, it's kind of creating a permission structure for it, and it's just has the potential to escalate. So that's my feeling. I'm an educated professor of politics, so I shouldn't use foul language. I like that. I do like the compliment. Sometimes people resent being asked not to use swear words, but I'm focusing on the compliment part of that, and I thank you. Thank you, Selden. Let's go play. Mwah. Bye, everybody. Oh, no, wait, I'm a professory type person, so I shouldn't blow kisses either. I'll just say wave or say have a great night. Bye, San Diego. Stay classy. Thanks, Bernadette. Cheers. Our language has been shown to be an important mechanism of pain release for people who are trying to. Okay, Pumpkin wants me to go. Bye. Bye. Thank you. Night, night, everybody. Take care. Oh, look, Boston Tea Party was there this whole time. I'm glad you were quiet, Boston Tea Party. Unless you're going to be good. Bye.